Good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and I am here with members of our executive team for the Westchester County Government's Executive Branch, Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins and Director of Operations Joan McDonald, to give you a preview of the budget that we're working on for the fiscal year 2023. Our fiscal year in county government is also the calendar year, so we have the responsibility to have a budget in place by January 1st for the period of January 1st through December 31st of 2023. I'm joined here for this announcement in the room by the chair of the Westchester County Board of Legislators, Catherine Borgia, two of her colleagues, Vidat Gashi, legislator who is chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and James Nolan, who is the minority whip of the legislature, are here with us as well for this announcement. The purpose today is just to give you a sense of what's coming. A week from today, we will be revealing the proposed budget for 2023 in its entirety, which will include all of those elements of the budget that the Board of Legislators will need to review over the course of the next month to almost a month and a half. We have previously released the capital budget proposal that we have, which is in the possession of the Board of Legislators, and then, of course, the process after we make that announcement next Thursday will be for the Board to have a series of internal meetings in the Budget and Appropriations Committee, have a series of public forums or hearings where people can come and comment to the Board. They have a period of time in which they can add expenditures and add revenues to the budget and then make appropriate deletions of spending and revenue to the budget, and then come to a final vote in which they adopt the budget. And then at that point in time, it comes to me for a signature from the executive branch. I hold line item veto and veto power. We've never had to use that because we generally negotiate through this process and try to get to an understanding of what's acceptable to both the legislative branch and the executive branch, and understanding there's a two-party dynamic in the legislative branch, and people represent different portions of the county with different priorities. But that's still ahead of us. Last night, we had the second of our two public forums on the budget from the executive branch, where we invited individuals to come and talk to us about the priorities they wanted to see in the budget. And we've been working on the budget now for the better part of 5 months, and that has been Joan's responsibility. All of the commissioners of the various departments had to submit proposed operating expenses as well as capital expenses to Joan and to her Deputy Director of Operations, Emily Saltzman, and then out of that, and the Budget Director, Larry Sewell, comes a final document, which we're now in the final days of finalizing. There are some elements of it that have not yet been finalized, and that's what the next week is before we turn it over to Chair Borgia and Committee Chair Vidat Gashi. But it is appropriate for me to share with you probably the single biggest news that people want to know about, which is whatever this budget has or doesn't have in spending, what does it do to my county property taxes? And we're very happy to announce that the budget, as we submitted to the Board of Legislators, will have a $6 million reduction in the county property tax levy. That is the fourth consecutive year that the county government has, in this case, proposed, but will be adopting a budget that has a reduction in county property taxes. That is unprecedented in the history of Westchester County, that we would have 4 straight years of a reduction in tax. Now, I must caution you, when you think about your own property taxes, depending on where you live in Westchester County, you generally pay in the vicinity of 60% to 2/3 of your total property taxes to your school district. And then the remaining 1/3 to 40% is divided between the local governments in whatever fashion your local governments are structured. The county government, the city government if you live in a city, or the combination of village and town government if you live in a village, all of this is structured. We have some communities that are not part of our refuse district. We have communities that are in separate sewer districts, and they have different levels of taxation in the sewer districts depending on the sewer treatment plant and that's involved. And then we have some that are not in sewer districts at all. So there's a little bit of a difference and a nuance. City of Yonkers represents a nuance because that is the one city government that controls its school district, and its tax structure is different than the other municipalities in Westchester. But the bottom line is still that we've looked at the operating needs of the county government. We've looked at the revenue streams that we have, not only property tax, but sales tax and a host of other different revenue streams. And we're confident that the overall budget that we present will be balanced, will be substantive, and we'll be able to cut property tax levy by an additional $6 million. Now, what that will do is take the total county property tax levy for Westchester County, if it's adopted, and I don't assume it's automatically going to be adopted in the form that we present it, but we'll project that, at least for the moment. it will mean that we are taxing county property less than the day that I came into office on January 1st in 2018. The budget that we walked in to administer for 2018 had an aggregate general fund tax levy of $559 million plus, and we are now proposing a budget levy of $542 million. That number obviously is $17 million, $17.2 million lower than the budget that we first had to govern the county. And so over the course of now 4 years into a fifth year, a total reduction in the amount of taxes that people are paying. And I think it's very important because there's always a lot of rhetoric out there about elected officials at every level of government that they always raise taxes and they never know how to be economic in their behavior. We have already proven by the last 3 adopted budgets, and we've run the government almost completely for 2 of those years and almost completely for the 3rd of those years without any problems meeting the targets that we've had with a reduced amount of property tax levy. And so we'll be able to do that again this year, depending on how we finalize the budget. But it is important to note that, and I think as we start to see the specifics next week, you'll have a chance to evaluate the way money has been allocated for operational purposes. Keep in mind, New York State has established, a number of years ago, I was in the state legislature during this period of time, a 2% tax cap. Now, the 2% is not a hard 2%. There are provisos by which a local government can go above the 2%, depending on what some of their decisions have been prior to that. If they've gone a number of years below the 2%, they're entitled to go slightly above it. But in principle, it's a 2% tax cap. Over the course of this administration, this being the 5th year of our operation, we have cut property taxes, will have cut property taxes 4 of those years, and we stayed tax cap compliant in the very first year as we were trying to deal with some of the budget issues that we faced when we walked in the door. We have had some issues to deal with collectively between the legislative branch and the executive branch relative to our finances. The assessment that was done at the end of 2017, which is prior to my taking responsibility here, was that we had issues that the Wall Street rating agencies found objectionable, and they lowered our bond rating from AAA to AA1 or AA plus. There's 3 different rating agencies, but they all took that action simultaneously. They also put us on a negative watch at that period of time, and that made it more expensive for us to borrow money to do the various actions that we have to do in county government. Over the course of this period of time since that happened, those actions occurred in 18 following their assessment of the closeout of budget year 2017. We've been able to address some of those issues and have some stability. Let me give you an example of what some of those things are, and they will continue forward in this budget. We are not borrowing to pay for the tax certiorari reimbursements that we are responsible to pay for those businesses that have filed for tax relief and been granted tax relief by the court. In the past, that lump sum of money was financed by borrowing. We have stopped that process. We budget sufficient money in the budget within the revenue and the expenditures to pay for that as we go along, and the rating agency sees that as responsible budgeting. They also know that we have not borrowed now in the last 2 cycles to maintain our pension costs. Every year, we and every other government are assessed a certain amount of money to keep the New York State Pension Fund properly balanced. When that number has come in the past, prior circumstances, they borrowed money to cover that payment. And when you borrow money for a pension, annual pension payment, just as if you borrow money for your tax certiorari, it's like borrowing money from a bank to paint your house. By the time you pay off the note, it takes you 10 years or 20 years to pay off the note, but you need to repaint your house in a sooner time frame than that. And you're spending more money, as you should know, when you borrow money because you're paying interest. You're getting the money now, but you're paying interest to whoever lends you that money. That is the same basic principle that happens in municipal finance. So when we pay as we go, when we structure within our budget the expenses that we have responsibility for pension costs, or the responsibilities we have for paying certiorari payments, we are making responsible financial decisions. And I understand that most people don't think that those of us in government service are capable of making intelligent financial decisions. I always like to point out that all 3 of us have had corporate experience separate and distinct from our public experience, and of a nature that influences our policies every bit as much as our time in the public arena has influenced our policies. One other thing that the rating agencies look at, we need to have, just as you have as an individual, a rainy day fund. we need to have savings accounts, or in our case, what we call it is a fund balance, that there be money available to us to handle any surprise obligations that may come along for which there was no budgeting. And we're not talking about small circumstances, we're talking about major situations. When you save money in your home budget, you might be saving for your retirement. You might be saving for your children's education. But you also know that if your heating system breaks down and you have to get a whole new system automatically, the cost of that has to come from somewhere, and it generally will come from your savings, because normally what we live on doesn't create enough money in a short period of time to be able to pay for that kind of an expenditure. So you put money away for the rainy day. Westchester County in the last couple of years now have been able to do that, and our fund balance has been significantly increased, and it gives those rating agencies the confidence that we're making intelligent business decisions. So this budget for 2023 continues those wise fiscal policies. This budget does not borrow to pay for tax certiorari's. This budget does not borrow to pay for pensions. This budget has no use of fund balance to balance the budget. We don't draw from our savings account to pay for our weekly bills. That is not part of this. And we're paying down on some of the money that was borrowed in the past, and we're paying down against that amount of money. And there's no borrowing for cash flow. That sometimes happens when people submit their property taxes at certain times of the year. We still have to make payments on a monthly basis. The cash flow sometimes can be affected if you're running very close to the borderline. It's people who live paycheck to paycheck, and they get a bill in the first week of the month that's due, but they won't have the money to pay for it until their paycheck comes in. That's a dangerous practice for a government. It's a dangerous practice for an individual, and we have avoided that by structuring our finances so that we do not have to borrow money just to cover cash flow, which are then paid either by tax anticipation notes or revenue anticipation notes. There is a general sense in all of this, as this goes before the legislature, that there will be scrutiny of this budget now by the legislature. We know the number of groups out there, the League of Women Voters, the Scarsdale Forum will analyze the budget. They'll comment on the budget. We have a Citizens Budget Advisory Committee, individuals who are independent of the government, who will make some assessments. And of course, the public will make their assessments. The legislature will have a host of different meetings to discuss elements of the budget, so that it's not just the macro picture, which I'm presenting today, but all of the different component pieces that go into it. Truth be told, not every single piece has been ratcheted down, but we've looked at the revenue side of it, and the things that we've talked about today will be in the budget, Madam Chair, as it's presented to the Board of Legislators. I should note, as I make my presentation, we've been joined by another county legislator, David Tubiolo of Yonkers has joined us as well. But it's important to understand for you the resident, that we are able to cut county property taxes and still have a responsible budget that meets the needs that we're required to provide. There are certain services we must provide, and at the same time, there are other programs and services that we subjectively or discretionarily consider important, which we will pay for. And we can do that without gimmicks, without tricks. And that's a very important thing to know. There's a general perception, I think, that people have that government operates in ways that are very different from the way businesses operate. There are certainly differences between the corporate sector and the government sector. But I think the budget that we're talking about now, when we can cut property taxes, when we can fund our needs, when we can do it without any kind of fiscal gimmickry, and when the rating agencies take a look at this, if they find that we're continuing on the path, then I think on the right path, then we'll be continuing on the right path to restore our credit rating back to the AAA. That won't happen in the short term, but I think that is very possible because we've now put a couple of years together of responsible practices. I must also say that this budget is subject to the same winds of change that are out there for everybody. We're in an inflationary moment. We don't truly know how inflation will affect us. We've made some judgments in the preparation of the budget to try to deal with the fact that it might cost 1 unit to do something today, and it might cost 1.5 units to do that in the future because of inflation. We also don't know, and we follow the same things that you follow, that we may be subject to a coming recession when the strategies used by the federal government to fight inflation and slow the economy down, could slow it down to the point of recession. If recession hits at some level, it affects our revenue streams. And if our revenue dries up in those areas where economic development, economic activity drives the numbers, like sales tax, it's also true at the state level with income tax. The more economic activity happens, the more revenues you get. You don't have to raise the rate of it. You just have more people making more money and spending more money, so therefore you have more tax money coming in. Should that change with recession, this is where we hopefully have built into the budget enough basis to cover for that, should that happen. And that's where it gets difficult and subjective. And of course, I have been in the legislative side of this process for 13 years. Ken also, similar period of time. I don't envy my friends in the legislature because now they have to discuss these issues, but they also have to discuss these issues in light of constituents who come to them and say, we would like this thing very much, and we have our pressures and problems, and can you please satisfy our need? This is an important need, whether it's countywide or in a particular district, and all of that is part of the budget process that's ahead of us. But it is important to realize that all of these decisions represent our clear understanding that these are difficult economic times. No one is glossing over the reality of things. We recognize that people are having a tough time of it. In coming out of the COVID situation, Westchester has bounced back better than many other jurisdictions, but we still have difficult times. And we reflect knowledge of that by delivering a budget that's responsible and cuts property taxes again. Now, let me repeat a couple of other things that we've done. We talked about this earlier this week. The Board of Legislators has already passed, and we have signed into law, a rescission of sales tax that will begin December 1st on home energy products. If you heat your home by oil, by natural gas, by propane, by electric, and I've often said, with tongue-in-cheek, by wood or by coal, you would pay a sales tax normally on that product being purchased. And that sales tax is the 8.375 percentage on the cost. We are lifting the 4% portion of that sales tax, which is county sales tax. Now, that's a loss of revenue. But we believe we can absorb that loss of revenue because of the revenue performance of sales tax and other things in other categories. But home heating oil is one of those essential costs that people have. It's there with rent or mortgage payment, child care, whatever those core expenses are in a person's life. Heating your home is right there as well. And so we've lifted that, and that has already been done jointly. It's a bipartisan decision by the legislature and the executive branch to reflect that situation. I'm also happy to announce that we are again proposing to implement a lifting of the bus fares in Westchester County. Now, we did that from June till Labor Day, September 5th, which is slightly more than 3 months in the summertime, and we felt it was a worthwhile effort. It made it easier for those people that use the bus system to have it as a free bus system during those months. There was certainly a drop in ridership due to COVID. We wanted to try to encourage people to come back on the bus. We wanted them to use a more cost-efficient way of operating, a more environmentally sensitive way of operating, where their trips could be taken on a Beeline bus system rather than a car. At the same time, we also signed on during the summer months for a 3-month rescission of sales tax within a certain parameter on gasoline at the pump. So both of those actions happen side by side. We're reinstituting the lifting of the bus fares for the period of time around Thanksgiving, and then a larger period of time around the Christmas, New Year's period of time at the end of December. We think that's helpful for people that will use the bus to go to work, people that will use the bus perhaps to go shopping in many of the places that you can shop in this county, Ridge Hill, Central Avenue, Yonkers and Greenburgh, downtown White Plains, and in some of the hamlets of our communities, where bus becomes an important transportation tool. It's also an important transportation for workers to get to their place of employment. So we will rescind it from the Saturday before Thanksgiving until the Sunday after Thanksgiving, this month of November. We'll announce the specific dates that apply in December, but it'll be a 2-week period, I think we've structured for it there, that will cover the Christmas holiday and right up to including New Year's and perhaps New Year's Day. So that you'll have no bus fare at that point in time. We continue during the months of November and December to lift any charges for those individuals that are sitting for a civil service test. You sit for a civil service test if you're looking for employment, not just at the county government, but in any of our civil service entities, all of our municipalities. People who want to be a policeman or a fireman sit for civil service tests. We've lifted the fees on that, and that continues through these months of November and December. We had already made the support decision alongside of the Westchester Community College Board of Trustees to freeze tuition payments for the full year, academic year of 2022 to 2023. And of course, that continues through this period of time. So as people at the end of December get ready to start a spring semester in January, and they're worried about circumstances, we have frozen that across the board. These are examples of things that we can do. We don't control the price of food at your supermarket as a county government. We don't control the price of baby food formula or the availability of baby food formula. There's many of these things are outside of the control of county government. But what is within our control, we have looked at to try to be sensitive and prudent. And we are open to continued suggestions, which may come from legislators, or may come from citizens who approach legislators, or those of the executive branch. And if we think we can absorb the loss of revenue without putting ourselves in any fiscal difficulty, we will try to do those things. And if we can do those things, we're making a statement to you. We're telling you that we understand these are tough times, and we're trying to address those tough times to the best of our ability. So I know this is a bit of a monologue. I do apologize for the one-sidedness of it, but we wanted to convey some information very directly. We expect to be here a week from today, a little earlier in the day, probably about 11:30. And we'll ask Chairwoman Borgia and Committee Chair Vidat Gashi to join us on the podium that day. We'll go over the full outline of what is in the county budget. We'll talk about the different highlights of what we're doing, and then we will physically turn the budget over to the board for their work and scrutiny, and we'll look forward to them. They will take center stage on the budget process, and they will announce the various sessions that they intend to have. Our administration will participate with them. They'll ask questions. We'll try to give them intelligent answers, and we'll negotiate what differences occur and try to get to a reasonable budget that we can all sign off on. And it will be in place in time for the start of the new year. We have never had a late budget in Westchester County. We have no intention to start this year. I have no sense that that would even be an issue on the table, but that is our commitment. So that's my purpose in inviting you to watch us for a few minutes today to let you know that we are planning to cut county property taxes again this year. We're doing it in a fiscally responsible way. We will have a full budget out publicly a week from today on Thursday, November 10th, and we invite your public input. And we hope that, along with the other actions that we take, that we are collectively doing the work that we were sent here to do in an appropriate way. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Thank you for watching, and we look forward for your continued attention as we continue the process not just of the budget, but of all the things that we're responsible for in Westchester County government. Have a good day and a safe week.